The silver ship moved through space like a gentle whisper. Inside, Ambassador Zekathari checked his equipment for the 5th time in 10 minutes. His long, crystal-like fingers trembled as he adjusted the controls on his environmental suit. The readings from Earth had been clear. This was a Class 5 Deathworld. Dangerous, yes, but nothing his people couldn't handle with proper protection. "Ambassador," his aide Clickmore said from across the cabin, "the humans are waiting for us at their landing site." Zekathari nodded. His species, the Veltar, had made contact with hundreds of worlds over the centuries. They knew how to handle primitive species from mildly hostile planets. Earth would be no different. On the surface below, Captain Jake Morrison straightened his dress uniform and tried to look professional. The morning sun was already hot, and he could feel sweat forming under his collar. Beside him, Dr. Lisa Carter held her translation device with both hands. She had spent months learning the alien language through radio signals from space. "Remember what we talked about?" Jake whispered to the small group of humans standing with him. "They think our planet is only moderately dangerous. Let's not scare them on the first day." Dr. Lisa nodded. "The reports we sent mentioned some weather and animals, but we kept it simple. No need to tell them about tornadoes or grizzly bears just yet." Behind them, Colonel Pete Jackson stood with his hands behind his back. He had read the alien files on what they considered dangerous. Their homeworld had weather that barely changed, gravity so light that a human could jump 30 feet in the air, and the most dangerous animal was about as threatening as a house cat. "This should be interesting," Pete muttered under his breath. The alien ship landed without making a sound. It was beautiful, smooth and shining like polished metal. A door opened with a soft hiss, and the first alien stepped out. Ambassador Zekathari was tall and thin, almost 7 feet high but probably weighing less than a human teenager. His body looked like it was made of living crystal, with light dancing through his transparent skin. He moved carefully, as if he was afraid the ground might break under his feet. "Greetings, humans of Earth," Zekathari said. His voice came through a small device on his chest. "I am Ambassador Zekathari of the Galactic Coalition. We welcome you to the community of civilized worlds." Jake stepped forward and tried to smile in a way that wouldn't show too many teeth. He had learned that many alien species found human teeth frightening. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador. I'm Captain Jake Morrison. This is Dr. Lisa Carter, our language expert, and Colonel Pete Jackson." Zekathari made a gesture that might have been a bow. "Your world has been classified as a Class 5 Deathworld in our records. We understand that you have learned to live with some challenges, and we respect your strength." Lisa and Jake looked at each other quickly. Class 5 was what the aliens considered dangerous? Earth was much worse than Class 5, but they had decided not to correct the mistake right away. "We're happy to meet you," Lisa said carefully. "Would you like to see our facilities?" As they walked toward the buildings, Zekathari noticed something odd. The humans were not wearing any protective gear. No environmental suits, no breathing apparatus, no gravity compensators. They were just walking around in thin clothes under the direct light of their star. "Are you not concerned about radiation exposure?" Zekathari asked. Jake looked up at the sun. "Oh, you mean sunlight? Nah, it's not too bad today. Maybe we'll put on some sunscreen later if it gets really bright." Zekathari made a note on his device. These humans were tougher than expected. They had barely walked 50 yards when the ground began to shake. Zekathari's crystal body started vibrating like a tuning fork. His environmental suit's alarms began beeping frantically. He dropped to his knees, trying to brace himself against what was obviously a major seismic disaster. The humans just kept walking. "What's happening?" Zekathari cried out, his voice high with panic. "Oh, that's just a small earthquake," Dr. Carter said, looking back at him with concern. "Are you okay?" "It's only about a 4.2. We barely felt it." Zekathari stared at her. On his homeworld, any ground movement was a sign of planetary catastrophe. Here, the humans called it small and barely felt it. "This happens often?" he asked, struggling to get back to his feet. "Every day somewhere in California," Jake said, reaching out to help the alien up. Most of them are too small to notice. The big ones are kind of exciting, though. Zekthari made another note. These humans lived on a world where the ground regularly tried to kill them, and they found it exciting. As they reached the main building, the weather began to change. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and the wind picked up. To the humans, it looked like a typical afternoon thunderstorm. To Zekthari, it looked like the end of the world. "Should we take shelter?" he asked, watching the clouds with growing terror. "From what?" Pete asked, following the alien's gaze. "Oh, the storm? It's just a little rain. Might be some thunder and lightning, but nothing serious." Zekthari's environmental suit began calculating the energy levels in the approaching storm. The readings made no sense. The electrical discharges were powerful enough to level cities. The wind speeds were reaching levels that would be considered weapons of mass destruction on most coalition worlds. "Lightning?" he whispered. "Yeah, probably," Lisa said. "It's actually kind of pretty at night. The kids love watching it through the windows." The alien's crystal form went completely transparent with shock. These humans let their young observe planet-killing energy discharges for entertainment. The first drops of rain began to fall. Each drop hit the ground like a tiny bullet. Zekthari's suit registered the impacts and calculated that this light rain was hitting with enough force to cause serious injury to most coalition species. The humans didn't even seem to notice. "We should probably head inside," Jake said, not because of the rain, but because he could see their alien guest was terrified. "Would you like some coffee?" Inside the building, Zekthari tried to process what he had experienced in just 30 minutes on Earth. Ground tremors that happened daily. Energy storms that the natives found pretty. And now they were offering him a beverage that his suit's sensors identified as a mild poison. "Coffee is safe for your species?" he asked carefully. "Oh, sure," Pete said, pouring himself a cup of the black liquid. "Most humans drink several cups a day. Some people drink 10 or 12 cups. Zekthari watched in fascination and horror as Pete consumed what would be a lethal dose of stimulants for most known species. The human showed no ill effects at all. "Your people are very resilient," Zekthari said finally. Jake shrugged. "We do okay. Earth can be a little rough sometimes, but you learn to adapt. A little rough." Zekthari made another note. These humans described a world of constant seismic activity, violent electrical storms, and toxic beverages as a little rough. Through the window, he could see the storm growing stronger. Lightning was striking the nearby mountains with enough energy to power small cities. The humans were watching it with what appeared to be enjoyment. "Beautiful storm," Lisa commented, sipping her coffee. "The lightning is really active today." Zekthari realized he was going to need to revise his reports. Earth was not a Class 5 death world. It was something much, much worse, and somehow, impossibly, it had produced a species that not only survived but actually seemed to enjoy the constant danger. As thunder shook the building, Zekthari began to understand that the Galactic Coalition had made a serious mistake in their classification of Earth. This was not going to be a routine first contact mission. Outside, the storm continued to rage, and the humans continued to treat it like background entertainment. 3 months had passed since the first meeting between humans and the Galactic Coalition. Dr. Thrindahl, a xenobiologist from the water world of Aquaris, had volunteered to study human culture up close. He thought it would be an easy assignment. After all, Earth was only classified as a Class 5 death world. Now, as he sat in his reinforced research station for the 12th time in 3 months, Dr. Thrindahl was beginning to think the Coalition had made a terrible mistake. "Good morning, Doc," called Dr. Ben Collins as he walked into the lab. The human was completely soaked from head to toe, water dripping from his clothes onto the floor. Outside, what the humans called a light shower was pounding the building with enough force to dent the Coalition-grade metal walls. Dr. Thrindahl watched from inside his protective bubble as Ben casually shook the water from his hair. On Aquaris, rain was a gentle mist that fell softly like tiny kisses. Here on Earth, each raindrop hit like a small projectile. "How are you not injured?" Dr. Thrindahl asked, his voice shaking slightly. Ben looked confused. "From the rain? It's just water, Doc." Actually feels pretty good on a hot day like this. The alien sensors showed that the light shower was hitting with enough force to knock down most coalition species. Ben was treating it like a refreshing experience. Would you like some coffee? Ben asked, reaching for the pot of black liquid that Dr. Thrindahl had learned to fear. I still do not understand how your species consumes that substance, Dr. Thrindahl said, watching Ben pour himself a large cup. Ben took a long drink of the liquid that registered as a Class 3 toxin on coalition sensors. Coffee's great. Helps you wake up in the morning. Want to try some? I can make it weaker for you. Dr. Thrindahl's entire body shuddered. Even weaker human coffee would probably kill him. No, thank you. I prefer my nutrition in non-toxic forms. Outside, lightning began to flash across the sky. Dr. Thrindahl immediately activated his emergency protocols and sealed his protective bubble. Lightning was one of the most dangerous forces in the galaxy. On most worlds, a single bolt could destroy entire cities. Ben walked over to the window and watched the light show with obvious pleasure. Beautiful storm tonight, Ben said, pressing his face against the glass. Want to go outside and get a better view? Dr. Thrindahl made a sound that was probably his species' version of screaming. You wish to go outside? During an electrical storm? Sure, why not? Lightning's amazing to watch. As long as you're not standing under a tree or holding a metal rod, you're pretty safe. The alien sensors were registering energy discharges that could power small space stations. Ben was describing them as amazing to watch and suggesting they go outside to get closer. Your species has a very unusual definition of safety, Dr. Thrindahl said weakly. Meanwhile, on the coalition capital world of Centris Prime, emergency meetings were being held every day. The footage coming back from Earth was causing panic among member species. Admiral Kreshta, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish, was reviewing the latest reports with growing horror. Show me the footage again, she said to her aide. The holographic display activated, showing human children playing in something called snow. The frozen precipitation was falling from the sky like millions of tiny ice missiles. Any one of those ice crystals could seriously injure most coalition species. The human children were catching them on their tongues and laughing. They let their young play in frozen projectile storms? Admiral Kreshta asked. Yes, Admiral, they call it fun. The adult humans were observed making sculptures from the accumulated ice missiles. Another video showed humans engaged in something called swimming. They were voluntarily submerging themselves in large bodies of water and moving around for pleasure. On most coalition worlds, being surrounded by that much liquid would be considered a form of torture. And they do this recreationally, the Admiral asked. According to our reports, Admiral, they have competitions to see who can stay underwater the longest and who can move through the water the fastest. Admiral Kreshta felt faint. These humans were competing to see who could survive drowning the longest. Back on Earth, Commander Rick Hayes was giving Ambassador Zekthari a tour of New York City. Rick thought it would be nice to show the alien what a normal human city looked like. He had no idea that he was essentially giving a tour of what most species would consider a nightmare. This is Times Square, Rick said proudly, gesturing at the crowded intersection. Pretty typical for a busy day. Ambassador Zekthari looked around in terror. Thousands of humans were moving in all directions at speeds that would be lethal to most coalition species. Massive vehicles were racing past at velocities that could cause serious damage. And everywhere there were flashing lights and loud noises that would overload the sensory systems of most known lifeforms. How do you avoid collisions? Zekthari asked, watching a human child run between the moving vehicles. Oh, you just pay attention, Rick said. New Yorkers are pretty good at avoiding each other. A flock of pigeons suddenly dove overhead, their wings beating frantically as they navigated between the tall buildings. Zekthari dropped to the ground and covered his head. Incoming aerial predators, he shouted. Rick looked up at the birds and laughed. Those are just pigeons, Ambassador. City birds. They're mostly harmless. Zekthari slowly stood up, his crystal body shaking. He had watched the birds perform flight maneuvers that would kill most coalition species through sheer gravitational force. The humans called them mostly harmless. They live among you? He asked. Sure, Rick said, as one of the pigeons landed nearby and began pecking at some crumbs. Sometimes they're a little annoying, but you get used to them. What Rick didn't know was that Earth pigeons were built like tiny organic missiles. They could accelerate to speeds that would cause most alien species to black out, change direction in ways that defied physics, and land with precision that most coalition military pilots couldn't match. Would you like to get some lunch? Rick asked. There's a great hot dog stand right over there. Zekthari followed nervously as Rick approached a small cart where a human was cooking meat over an open flame. The smell alone was enough to make the alien's environmental suit activate its emergency filters. 2 hot dogs, please, Rick said, to the vendor. Extra mustard on mine. The vendor handed Rick 2 tubes of cooked meat covered in various sauces. Rick bit into his immediately, chewing and swallowing what Zekthari's sensors identified as a mixture of processed proteins, chemical preservatives, and spices that would be considered biological weapons on most worlds. These are good, Rick said, offering the second hot dog to Zekthari. Want to try it? The alien's environmental suit immediately began flashing warning lights. I do not think my digestive system could process that substance safely. Rick shrugged and ate the second hot dog himself. More for me, I guess. As they walked back through the city, Zekthari tried to process what he had witnessed. Humans lived in an environment of constant motion, surrounded by creatures that could kill them, eating substances that were basically poison, and they seemed to enjoy all of it. Your species is remarkably adaptable, Zekthari said finally. We do okay, Rick replied. You learn to roll with the punches when you grow up here. Roll with the punches. Zekthari made another note. Humans used violent metaphors to describe basic survival. That evening, Dr. Thrindahl was preparing his daily report for the Coalition Council. His observations were becoming more disturbing each day. Day 92 of Earth observation, he dictated to his recording device. The humans continued to display impossible resilience to environmental hazards. Today's subject consumed multiple doses of what can only be described as liquid stimulant poison, exposed himself to high-velocity precipitation without protection, and suggested observing planetary electrical discharge phenomena for recreational purposes. He paused, watching Ben through the window as the human jogged past in the rain, apparently enjoying the experience. I am beginning to suspect that Earth's classification as a Class 5 Deathworld is a serious underestimation. These humans are not simply surviving on their world. They are thriving in conditions that would eliminate most known forms of life. Dr. Thrindahl sealed his report and transmitted it to Coalition headquarters. He had no idea that his words would soon cause the biggest crisis in galactic diplomatic history. Outside, the storm continued, and the humans continued to treat it like entertainment. The emergency session of the Galactic Coalition Council was the largest gathering in the organization's 1,000-year history. Representatives from 847 different species filled the massive chamber on Centris Prime. Some floated in special atmosphere bubbles, others hung from the ceiling, and a few existed as patterns of light that danced in the air. Coalition Chief Scientist Mordek stepped forward to address the assembly. His forearms trembled as he activated the holographic display system. Behind him, an image of Earth appeared, blue and white and seemingly peaceful. Fellow beings, Mordek began, his voice amplified through the chamber's translation system. We have made a grave error. Our preliminary classification of the third planet of the Sol system was not merely wrong. It was catastrophically inadequate. A wave of concerned sounds rippled through the chamber. Species that communicated through color changes flashed worried patterns, while others released nervous chemical signals into the air. Our initial survey teams classified Earth as a Class 5 Deathworld. Mordek continued. This assessment was based on limited orbital observations and basic atmospheric readings. We now know this classification was dangerously insufficient. The holographic display changed to show weather patterns on Earth. Massive spiral storms larger than some planets spun across the surface. Lightning bolts crackled with energy levels that could power entire star systems. Senator Vexilon of the Crystalline Consortium raised one of her faceted limbs. Chief Scientist, our records show that Class 5 worlds are at the upper limit of habitable. Surely you cannot suggest this world is worse? Mordek's expression was grim. Senator, according to our revised calculations based on 3 months of direct observation, Earth should be classified as a minimum Class 13 death world, possibly Class 14. The chamber erupted in chaos. Gasps, shrieks, and emergency chemical releases filled the air. Several smaller species immediately fainted and had to be revived by medical teams. Class 10 worlds were considered uninhabitable by all known life. Class 12 existed only in computer models as theoretical death traps. Class 13 was beyond the imagination of most civilized species. That is impossible, declared Admiral Corinth, a massive slug-like being whose species evolved in perfectly controlled cave systems. No complex life could survive on such a world. That is what we thought as well, Mordek replied. But the evidence is undeniable. The display showed a human child playing in what Earth natives called snow. Each frozen particle falling from the sky registered as a high-velocity projectile on coalition sensors. The child was catching them on his tongue and laughing. The precipitation on this world falls with enough kinetic energy to cause serious injury to most coalition species, Mordek explained. The native humans consider it recreational. Next came footage of humans swimming in the ocean. Massive waves crashed over their heads with enough force to crush most known life forms. The humans were riding the waves on small boards, apparently for enjoyment. They voluntarily exposed themselves to crushing liquid walls for entertainment, Mordek said. Our xenobiologists report that average Earth ocean waves generate more force than our military uses in demolition operations. Senator Trillick of the Floating Gardens Collective spoke up, her voice high with panic. Surely the atmospheric composition alone should prevent complex thought. The holographic display showed Earth's atmospheric readings. The atmosphere contains 21% free oxygen, Mordek announced. This concentration would be considered a fire hazard on most coalition worlds. The humans breathe it naturally and use it to increase their metabolic efficiency. More disturbing footage followed. Humans eating substances that registered as toxins. Humans walking around under direct stellar radiation without protection. Humans living in regions where the ground regularly moved with enough force to level cities. The seismic activity alone should prevent permanent settlements, observed Dr. Ket Mara, a researcher whose species lived in perfectly stable crystal formations. Yet humans have built massive cities directly on fault lines. Indeed, Mordek confirmed. The city called San Francisco has been destroyed by seismic activity multiple times throughout human history. They simply rebuild it in the same location. On Earth, Captain Danny Wright was having lunch with his coalition liaison, a nervous insectoid creature named Clicktat. Danny was enjoying what he considered a mild hot sauce on his sandwich. Clicktat's sensors had already classified the sauce as a chemical weapon capable of causing severe tissue damage. I must ask, Clicktat said, making careful notes on his datapad. Do you realize how unusual your species appears to other galactic civilizations? Danny took another bite of his sandwich and thought about it. How do you mean unusual? Your daily activities would be classified as extreme survival situations on most coalition worlds. You consume substances that would kill the majority of known species. You live in conditions that our military considers hazardous combat zones. Danny shrugged. It's just normal life, I guess. Everyone deals with their own local challenges. Clicktat's compound eyes focused on Danny with something approaching disbelief. This human had just described conditions that would wipe out entire civilizations as local challenges. Tell me about your recreational activities, Clicktat requested. Well, I like to go hiking in the mountains on weekends, Danny said. Sometimes camping if the weather's nice. Clicktat made rapid notes. Humans voluntarily traveled to high-altitude regions with reduced atmospheric pressure and extreme temperature variations for pleasure. And camping involves? You know, sleeping. Outside under the stars, maybe cooking over a fire, it's relaxing. The alien's writing stylus nearly broke in his grip. Humans considered exposure to the elements, open flame, and complete vulnerability to predators to be relaxing. Back on Centris Prime, the council session was reaching its conclusion. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying. Earth was not just a death world. It was a death world so extreme that it challenged the very concept of habitability. The gravity alone should have prevented the evolution of complex life. Mordek continued his presentation. At 1.0 coalition standard, it is nearly 3 times stronger than what most species can tolerate long-term. And yet the humans move naturally in this gravity? Asked Minister Polandra of the Low Gravity Cooperative. Not only do they move naturally, Mordek replied. They use increased gravity for physical training. They have developed exercise equipment that makes their already crushing gravity even stronger. The holographic display showed humans in a gym, lifting heavy metal objects repeatedly. The assembled council members watched in horror as creatures, already adapted to impossible gravity, deliberately made their situation worse for the purpose of becoming stronger. They deliberately increase physical stress on their bodies, whispered Senator Nexoria. Regularly. They call it working out. It is considered a normal part of their culture. Representative Yilmoth of the Peaceful Harmony Alliance raised a tentacle. What about their psychological profiles? Surely living in such extreme conditions has affected their mental development? Mordek consulted his notes. Surprisingly, psychological evaluations indicate that humans are generally cooperative, creative, and peaceful. Despite living in conditions that would drive most species insane, they have developed art, music, literature, and complex social structures. They are not violent? Asked General Vorthak, the coalition's military strategist. They are capable of violence when necessary, Mordek admitted. But their default state appears to be curiosity and cooperation. They seem genuinely excited about meeting other species and joining the galactic community. This information caused another wave of confused murmuring throughout the chamber. A species that could survive on a Class 13 death world should have been savage killers. Instead, they were friendly neighbors who wanted to share recipes and cultural experiences. What are your recommendations? Asked the council speaker, an ancient being whose species had founded the coalition eons ago. Mordek was quiet for a long moment. We proceed with extreme caution. These humans may be the most physically capable species we have ever encountered, but they show no signs of hostile intent. They are genuinely unaware of how unusual they are. Should we inform them of their world's true classification? Asked the speaker. I believe that would be unwise, Mordek replied. They might begin to understand the implications of their capabilities. For now, it may be safer if they continue to think of themselves as normal. The vote was unanimous. Earth would be reclassified as a Class 13 death world, possibly Class 14. The information would be restricted to the highest levels of coalition government, and humanity would be handled with the greatest diplomatic care possible. As the council session ended, one thought echoed through the minds of every representative present. The galaxy had just discovered that monsters could be friendly, and nobody knew what that meant for the future. The news about Earth's true classification spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Within days of the emergency council session, panic was setting in across coalition space. 3 species immediately recalled their ambassadors from Earth, claiming extreme diplomatic hazard. 5 more requested emergency evacuation protocols for their citizens working on human research projects. Dr. Amy Phillips, Earth's new chief xenobiologist, stood in her lab watching the chaos unfold through diplomatic channels. Her assistant, a nervous crystalline being named Shardek, was vibrating so rapidly that he looked like a tuning fork in an earthquake. Dr. Phillips, Shardek said through his translator, I have received 17 messages from my homeworld today. My family wants me to come home immediately. Amy looked up from her microscope where she had been examining alien tissue samples. Why? Is everything okay? They believe I am in mortal danger simply by being near humans, Shardek replied. My mother has contacted 3 different insurance companies to discuss hazard pay. Amy set down her equipment and looked at her alien colleague with genuine concern. Shardek, you know we would never hurt you, right? Humans don't go around attacking people. I know that intellectually, Shardek said, his crystal body flickering with nervous patterns. but the Coalition reports describe humans as living weapons that somehow achieved civilization. My species has trouble understanding how that is possible. What Shardek didn't mention was that his own people lived on a world where the most dangerous creature was roughly equivalent to a butterfly, and their idea of extreme weather was a light breeze that might blow flower petals around. Meanwhile, at Coalition military headquarters, General Vorthak was having the worst month of his career. The classified reports about human capabilities were keeping him awake at night. His latest briefing sat on his desk like a bomb waiting to explode. "Aide Kelmira," he called to his assistant. "Bring me the latest analysis on human military potential." The plant-based life form that served as his aide rustled nervously as she approached with a datapad. "General, are you certain you want to review this information again? You seemed quite distressed after the last reading." General Vorthak took the pad and began reading. The first line made his stomach drop. "Human military training deliberately takes place in conditions that most Coalition species would classify as elaborate torture." He continued reading. "Humans trained by carrying heavy weights across long distances. They practiced combat in environments that ranged from Arctic cold to desert heat. They learned to function without sleep, with limited food, and under constant physical stress. Most disturbing of all, they considered this normal preparation for their soldiers." "Aide Kelmira," General Vorthak said weakly, "what is the recommendation from our military analysts?" "Sir, the recommendation is simple. Do not anger the humans. And if they become aggressive? Sir, the report suggests that in such a scenario, surrender would be the most logical option." General Vorthak put his head in his hands. The Coalition's most advanced military civilization was recommending immediate surrender to a species that had just discovered faster-than-light travel. On Earth, Ambassador Kate Johnson was dealing with her own diplomatic crisis. Her office was flooded with messages from Coalition species requesting special safety protocols for any interactions with humans. Some were asking for armed escorts. Others wanted to conduct all meetings through holographic projection from orbit. "Ma'am," her secretary called from the outer office, "Ambassador Trenlak from the Cautious Collective is on the line. He wants to discuss the new interaction guidelines." Kate picked up the communication device. "Good morning, Ambassador Trenlak. How can I help you?" The response came through the translator with obvious nervousness. "Ambassador Johnson, my government has received the updated reports about Earth's classification. We are concerned about the safety of diplomatic personnel." "I understand your concerns," Kate said patiently, "but I want to assure you that humans have no intention of harming any Coalition representatives. We're excited about being part of the galactic community." "Yes, but the reports indicate that human recreational activities include something called extreme sports. Our analysts believe these may actually be combat training exercises disguised as entertainment." Kate thought about how to explain mountain climbing, skydiving, and whitewater rafting to a species whose idea of risk-taking was stepping outside on a cloudy day. "Those are just things we do for fun," she said carefully. "Like hobbies." The silence on the other end of the communication lasted so long that Kate wondered if the connection had been lost. "Ambassador Johnson," Trenlak finally said, "your species considers voluntarily falling from great heights to be fun? Well, with a parachute, yes. It's quite enjoyable once you get used to it." Another long silence. "I see. And the reports about humans who climb vertical rock faces using only their hands? Rock climbing is very popular. Great exercise and beautiful views when you reach the top." Kate could hear what sounded like emergency medical equipment being activated on the other end of the line. "Ambassador, I must go. I believe I need medical attention." Back in the research station, Dr. Ben Collins was having his daily meeting with Dr. Thrindahl. The alien scientist had gotten used to observing humans through protective barriers, but he was still struggling to understand their basic physiology. "Ben," Dr. Thrindahl said from inside his environmental bubble, "I have been studying human recreational eating practices. Can you explain the concept of spicy food?" Ben grinned and pulled out a small bottle from his pocket. "Oh, you mean hot sauce? Want to see how it works?" Dr. Thrindahl's sensors immediately began flashing warning signals as Ben opened the bottle. The chemical compounds inside registered as industrial-grade solvents. "You put this substance in your mouth voluntarily?" Dr. Thrindahl asked. "Sure, makes food taste better." Ben poured a generous amount onto his sandwich and took a large bite. "Some people like it even hotter than this." Dr. Thrindahl watched in scientific fascination as Ben consumed what would be a lethal dose of chemical irritants for most known species. The human showed no distress at all. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying the experience. "Do all humans possess this immunity to toxic substances?" "Pretty much," Ben said, taking another bite. "We build up tolerance. Kids start with mild stuff and work their way up to the really hot peppers. You train your young to consume increasing levels of toxins? I guess you could put it that way. My nephew loves the really spicy stuff. He's only 12, but he can handle ghost peppers." Dr. Thrindahl made rapid notes. Human children were deliberately exposed to increasingly dangerous substances as part of their normal development. This explained why adult humans could casually consume materials that would kill most civilized species. At the same time, Colonel Pete Jackson was conducting a routine military briefing that was being secretly monitored by coalition intelligence services. He was explaining basic human military doctrine to a group of new recruits. "Remember," Pete told the assembled soldiers, "the key to survival in hostile environments is adaptation and preparation. Whether you're dealing with desert heat, Arctic, cold jungle humidity, or mountain altitude, humans can learn to operate effectively anywhere." The coalition monitoring team recorded every word with growing horror. This human was casually describing operational capability in environments that would require massive technological support for most species to survive. And he was talking about it as basic training for their lowest-ranking soldiers. "Sir," one of the recruits asked, "what about the new alien allies? Should we expect to work with them in the field?" Pete considered the question. "Probably not in any kind of harsh environment. From what I understand, most coalition species need a lot of special equipment just to visit Earth safely. We'll likely be doing most of the heavy lifting when it comes to dangerous assignments." The coalition intelligence officers reviewing the recording nearly had collective nervous breakdowns. This human military leader was discussing his species' readiness to handle dangerous assignments that other civilizations couldn't even attempt. Meanwhile, Dr. Amy Phillips was trying to conduct a normal scientific exchange with her coalition colleagues. She had arranged a video conference with researchers from 12 different worlds to discuss comparative biology. "As you can see from these samples," Amy explained, holding up a vial of human blood, "our red blood cells are designed to carry oxygen very efficiently. This allows us to function at various altitudes and in different atmospheric conditions." On the screen, several alien scientists fainted simultaneously. Others activated emergency medical protocols. One species that communicated through color changes began flashing what Amy later learned were patterns of extreme distress. "Did I say something wrong?" Amy asked the remaining conscious participants. Dr. Mel Torin, a gaseous being from the Nebula Confederacy, managed to respond. "Dr. Phillips, your blood chemistry would be considered a biological weapon on most coalition worlds. The oxygen concentration alone would be toxic to 85% of known species." Amy looked at the vial in her hand. "But it's just normal human blood." "Yes," Dr. Meltorin replied weakly. "That is exactly the problem. 6 months had passed since the galaxy learned the truth about Earth. The initial panic was slowly giving way to a strange new reality. The Galactic Coalition had created something called the Terran Protocols, special safety guidelines for dealing with humans that read more like instructions for handling barely contained forces of nature. Colonel Pete Jackson found himself in the most unusual job in human history. He was now the official military liaison between Earth and the Coalition, which meant he spent most of his time reassuring terrified aliens that humans were not planning to conquer the galaxy. "The thing you have to understand," Pete explained, to a gathering of Coalition military leaders, "is that we're not trying to be scary. This is just how we are." The assembled officers represented dozens of species, each one looking distinctly uncomfortable despite being connected through holographic projection from the safety of their own ships. Admiral Trendok, a floating gas bag creature whose species considered heavy breathing to be dangerous exercise, spoke for the group. "Colonel Jackson, surely you must realize the implications of your physiology. Your species treats survival in impossible conditions as casual recreation." Pete shrugged, a gesture that had become famous throughout Coalition space as the terrifying human response to discussing things that should have been physically impossible. "We know we're tough," Pete said, "but everyone's got their advantages. You guys have faster than light travel, telepathic species, beings that can survive in the vacuum of space. We just happen to be good at not dying in unpleasant places." What Pete didn't mention, because it seemed too obvious to say, was that human children routinely survived accidents that would be classified as major disasters on most Coalition worlds. Admiral Trendok's gaseous form rippled nervously. "Colonel, our intelligence reports indicate that human military training involves deliberately creating survival scenarios that we would classify as war crimes if inflicted on prisoners. Basic training can be pretty tough," Pete admitted, "but that's how you learn to handle difficult situations. You can't prepare for the real thing without practicing in realistic conditions." The alien military leaders exchanged looks of what humans would recognize as barely controlled panic. This human was describing torture as realistic practice. Meanwhile, Dr. Lisa Carter was working on the most challenging translation project in galactic history. As head of the Human Coalition Cultural Exchange Program, she was trying to create educational materials that could help alien species understand human culture without causing mass hysteria. "The key," Lisa explained to her mixed species staff, "is context. When humans say something is a little dangerous, we need to translate that as potentially lethal to most galactic civilizations." Her assistant, Shardek, had stayed on Earth, despite his family's concerns, and was now something of an expert on human understatement. "And when they say something is challenging," he asked. "Probably impossible for anyone else to survive," Lisa replied. "We're working on a standardized translation guide." The guide was becoming quite extensive. Terms like refreshing swim had to be translated as voluntary submersion in crushing liquid environment. A nice hike became extended travel through hostile terrain for recreational purposes. And spicy food was simply labeled as controlled poisoning for entertainment. But perhaps the strangest development was the unexpected popularity of human tourism. Coalition species were discovering that visiting Earth was like the ultimate extreme experience, if you could survive it. Low-gravity species found Earth's crushing weight to be an incredible challenge. Species from climate-controlled worlds were amazed by the constant variation in weather. And everyone was fascinated by the fact that humans had somehow made this nightmare planet feel like home. Of course, Coalition tourists needed massive amounts of protective equipment. A typical alien visitor to Earth looked like they were exploring the surface of a gas giant. Environmental suits, gravity compensators, atmospheric filters, and emergency medical equipment were standard gear for even a short visit to a human city. "It's like adventure tourism," explained Captain Danny Wright to his friend Clicktat, who was planning a vacation to Earth. "Except, instead of climbing mountains or jumping out of airplanes, aliens get excited about walking around in normal Earth conditions." Clicktat adjusted his environmental suit nervously. "For my species, simply standing in Earth gravity for more than an hour is considered an extreme athletic achievement." "Really?" Danny asked. "That seems kind of limiting." "Danny," Clicktat said patiently, "your normal walking pace would be classified as a high-speed emergency evacuation for most Coalition species." The economic implications were staggering. Earth was becoming the galaxy's premier destination for extreme tourism, while human travel to Coalition worlds was booming because humans found low-gravity, climate-controlled environments incredibly relaxing. Human hotels on Coalition worlds had to put up signs asking guests not to accidentally break furniture by sitting down too hard, while alien hotels on Earth offered prizes to any non-human guest who could survive a full week without life support. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Ben Collins, the same human who had been accidentally terrifying, Dr. Thrindahl for months made a discovery that changed everything. "You know what's interesting?" Ben said during one of their daily meetings. We keep talking about how different we are, but we're all here having conversations. We're all curious about each other. We all want to learn and explore and make friends. Dr. Yu, Thrindal, still safely enclosed in his protective bubble, considered this observation. You believe our similarities are more important than our differences? I think so, Ben said. Sure, I can drink coffee that would kill you, and you can survive in water pressure that would crush me. But we both became scientists because we wanted to understand the universe better. We both care about our families and our friends. We both think it's amazing that we can talk to each other across space. It was a simple observation, but it started a revolution in galactic thinking. The coalition had been so focused on humanity's impossible physical capabilities that they had missed something crucial. Humans were genuinely nice people who happened to be nearly indestructible. Ambassador Kate Johnson stood before the coalition assembly for the final vote on humanity's membership. The debate had continued for months, but the conclusion was inevitable. The galaxy needed humans, even if they were terrifying. The coalition votes to accept humanity as full members, announced the speaker, with the understanding that Earth will remain classified as a Class 13 Deathworld, and that human representatives will continue to receive diplomatic immunity based on their unique physiological advantages. Kate smiled, a gesture that had become famous throughout coalition space for its display of what looked like predatory teeth, but was actually meant to be friendly. We're honored to join the galactic community, Kate said. We promise to be gentle. In the audience, Ambassador Zekthari shuddered slightly. He had learned enough about human language to know that when they promised to be gentle, it usually meant they were capable of being absolutely devastating but were choosing not to be. The integration wasn't perfect. There were still incidents. A human teenager visiting a coalition world accidentally caused a diplomatic crisis by jumping too high and being mistaken for an invasion. A coalition diplomat on Earth had to be hospitalized after trying to pet what he thought was a harmless Earth creature, but which turned out to be a house cat with claws. But slowly, understanding began to develop. The galaxy learned that humans were essentially living contradictions, impossibly dangerous beings who had somehow evolved to be cooperative and kind. They were survivors of a world that should have killed them, but instead of making them savage, it had made them adaptable and resilient. And humans began to understand that what seemed normal to them was actually extraordinary. They started to appreciate their own capabilities and to understand why other species found them so impressive and slightly terrifying. Dr. Amy Phillips summed it up best in her final report to the Coalition Science Council. Humans are not monsters who learned to be civilized. They are people who happened to evolve under conditions that made them nearly indestructible. The remarkable thing is not that they survived their world, but that they remained kind while doing it. As humanity took its place among the stars, the galaxy learned an important lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous worlds produce the most valuable allies. Sometimes the scariest thing about apparent monsters is discovering that they are capable of choosing gentleness. The final entry in Earth's coalition file read, Classification Class 13 Deathworld, possibly Class 14. Inhabitants. Friendly but handle with care. Recommend diplomatic approach with gifts of food. Do not ask about weather, recreational activities, or pets. Under no circumstances should coalition personnel attempt to match human alcohol consumption or physical activities. At the bottom, someone had added a note in smaller text. Humans consider Australia a vacation destination. Do not ask about Australia.